Okay, good morning. We're back. Back to Shimshon and Sefer Shoftim, Perik Tez Zayin, Pasuk Chav Gimel. So up to the point where Shimshon's been captured, his hair has been shaven off his head, he's in the jail, he's grinding the mill, and we explained already all the other degradations that happened to him while he was doing this. And we ended off with the hair growing back. Right at the end of Pasuk Chafez, his hair began to grow back, and the question, the point of the Pasuk saying this was that, of course, the Plishtim knew that the source of strength was in his hair, so why didn't they be careful it shouldn't grow back? So the point being that it grew back much quicker than anticipated. I guess they figured to give him a weekly haircut, whatever, but the hair grew back much faster than they believed it would grow, and therefore they weren't aware of its regrowth, which will ultimately be the source of his ability to get back his strength. So this really indicates that the holiness of a Jew can come back even if he has sunken so low into a sin. And certainly the way Rav Tzadok learns that Shimshon was involved in an Aveira Lishma, doing sin for the sake of heaven, certainly Hashem will help him back over there. So we continue now, Pasuk Chav Gimel, and we come to the climax of the entire story. V'sarnei plishtim nesku lisboach zevach gadol l'dogon Eloheihem u'lesimcha. And the Philistine governors, they gathered together to bring offerings, to bring a great offering, a zevach gadol, a great offering, to Dagon. Dagon was the name of their god, u'lesimcha, and for simcha. Vayomran, they said, Nosan Elokeinu biyodenu eis Shimshon oyevenu. They said, our God gave over into our hands Shimshon, our enemy. Now, it's interesting that even the Plishtim realized that that man is not completely in control of his destiny, and they realized it wasn't their own ingenuity that had delivered Shimshon into their hands. And they understood there was a higher power involved, but rather than ascribing that power to the ultimate source of power, which is Hashem, the real God who created the universe, they chose for self-serving reasons to invent imaginary gods. And these gods, which were obviously created in man's image, so to speak, could be manipulated to suit the worshipper's purposes. So therefore they've got their own God over here, and it's interesting that the God's name is Dagon. What does Dagon mean? Dagon means from Dagon Rov Dagon V'sirosh means grain. Means grain. And obviously, you could at least now. I mean, they could have had different gods back and forth. We'll see that Dagon comes back in Sefer Shmuel as their god as well. Means grain. So this is the God that will help them with the grain that they need.
Something to do with the harvest.
Well, that's certainly the harvest, and certainly after what Shimshon did to their harvest recently, they need their God to bring them plenty of grain. It's interesting that what was Shimshon's job in the prison house was to be a grain grinder. So they made Shimshon subservient to their God Dagon, the God of grain. And Shimshon now is subservient and is grinding the grain over there. Also, regarding the word simcha over here, it's very interesting the placement of the word. It says that they offered a great offering to Dagon, their god, and then they added this word u'lesimcha. It's funny wording over there. Like the sentence structure wouldn't usually lend itself to add that word simcha. So the Mitzvah says that also for the simcha that they have, so just to make a simcha. I mean, they're having a simcha, a joy that they've captured him. So I guess, to give an offering to their God, ula simcha, and for simcha. So the other commentaries, Radak and others, they say that they had simcha versus when Jews get together, it's more starting with Yiras Hashem, fear of Hashem. And instead of having a God-fearing moment, they just want to have fun. So this really captures the essence of their religion, which really just, we don't have a good time, we don't have a wild party, and it's like their avoda is just to be happy. So they're worshiping their God, and just to have a real wild party scene is what they're planning over here. Okay, let's move on out of Pasuk Chaf Dalet. Let's check the album over here. Okay, we have to look at it in terms of Chaf Gimel and Chaf Dalet. Now, this is the officers, the governors. The governors said, Hashem has given to us Shimshon, our enemy. Let's contrast that to Pasuk Chaf Dalet.
Not Hashem, Dogon.
I'm sorry? Like Dogon, rather, our God, Dogon has given over Shimshon, our enemy. The focus on Shimshon is Shimshon, our enemy. So it's looking Chaf Dalet though. Vayiru oso ha'am, and the people saw him. Vayihalalu es Eloheihem, and they praised their gods. Now look at what they say in contrast to what the governors said. Kiamru, because they said, Nosan Elokeinu biyadenu es oivenu. Our God has given into our hands our enemy. That's the same as the governors. But they add, Veis machari vartzenu, and the one who destroyed our land. Vasher hirba es chalalenu, and increased the dead people amongst us. Chalal is a dead person. So the Malbim points out that the governors, they offered the sacrifice in terms of their God, that they delivered their enemy into their hands. Shimshon's our enemy. The people were much more explicit and specific in detailing this. Number one, they said it was the enemy, but number two, it was the Machri Vartzenu. He destroyed our land when he burnt up all the crops, and he caused so many people to be killed. In other words, these people had to deal more with the realities of the ground. The governors just said, okay, he got our enemy. But the people who would suffer much more than the governors would suffer, they focused much more on the details. So now they're letting all this joy focus on, capturing Shimshon. Chafei. So now you see what happens when the non-Jewish enemies of the world and of the Jews get together to have a party. You'll see what happens. Chafei. Vayehi kitov libam. It was when their hearts were happy. Vayomru, and they said, Kiru l'Shimshon. Let's call Shimshon now. V'sachek lanu, and let him sport with us. Let's make fun of him. Vayikra l'Shimshon mebeis asurim, and they call Shimshon from the jailhouse. Now it's a different word over here being used. Vayitzachek lifneihem, and he does tzchok before them. We'll have to talk about this. The difference between vayitzachek and vayitzachek. There's different interpretations. Ve'amidu also bein amudim, and they put him in between the two pillars that hold up the entire building. Now right away, it's very interesting as we're coming up to Purim that there is a great similarity over here. What's the similarity? It says in the Megillah, and Achashverosh, and we'll talk more about it on Shabbos. Achashverosh made the party for 180 days and 7 days. Then it comes to end, it says, Vayehi kitov libam, it was when their hearts were good. Similar aspect. In other words, they're having about as much fun as they're able to have. It's like the highlight of the party. That's what Achashverosh did, a party for 7 days, and their hearts were good, meaning they were drunk and they were into all kinds of disgusting things. So it says eating and drinking. In other words, they really were having a real party, and as we know, part of the party that was involved in Achashverosh, it was a very immoral type of party. Can we compare it to many of the contemporary, modern underground parties that go on in the secular world, like a real crazy wild party? And it's a lust party, basically what's going on. A lot of immorality going on over there. And they want now Shimshon to come out and to sport with them, to have some fun with him. So certainly this is a great Chil Hashem has been happening the entire time, and it's only going to be increased now you have over here this helpless Shimshon, and the Philistines are crediting their gods to all this success. It's like the ultimate Chil Hashem. But you see one other thing is obviously a trend we see to the enemies of the Jewish people, that what is their worshiping their God? Contrast a Jew worshiping his God and a Philistine worshiping his God. What do you do when all the Jews get together in Shul and worship their God on a good day? They daven to Hashem. They daven to Hashem. They act properly, right? When you have a Purim, contrast our Purim to this party, right? Jews get together, even if we drink a little bit, but we're involved in giving tzedakah all day long, gifts to the poor, trying to make sad people happy. We certainly don't try to do things that are hurtful to other people on Purim. It's not the theme of the day. Okay, here they're worshiping their God, and what is the direct result? It's a party in honor of their God. So now they're going to do what's most honorable for their God. So what do? They make fun of a blinded prisoner for entertainment. That's what they do. So this obviously very different to the way Jews relate to their God. When it's time to praise their God, we're trying to elevate ourselves. Here, the whole point of this God is to condone their disgusting behavior. So that's a clear contrast that we see over here. We know when the Malachim sang praises to Hashem for splitting the sea of reeds, the Midrash tells us, God says to them, that my creations of my handiwork are being drowned in your singing. In other words, I'm not that happy we have to sing even if our enemies are being destroyed. And here they're taking full advantage and wanting to denigrate their enemy. Okay, I understand he was their enemy. I understand you want to kill him, but to make fun of him and to laugh at him and to joke at him. But that's how far it goes with them. So the question is, what is the difference between Vayisachek and Vayitzachek? So there's different interpretations. The Malbim says they wanted him to sin. In other words, to sport with him, in the immoral way of sporting with him. That's what they wanted to do. And they wanted him to sin and to make fun of him. That's what they brought him to Vayisachek. But he was Vayitzachek. He laughed at them. So the word Litzachek can be immorality, as we see again, and Yitzchak represents restraint of immorality, and here he was involved, according to the Malbim, in restraint, and he was not really playing into it, and he was doing tshuva at this time. And Reb Tzadok adds over here that now again they don't have to really be arguing, but it's Vayitzachek lifneihem. He sported before them, meaning to say he played along with them. And he played along with them, and maybe even to do more averos, but as he said before, to increase their guilt. He says, okay, I'll play along with you guys, only to really bring you down at the end. And Reb Tzadok adds, he says, Shimshon realized that he unfortunately was a source of great chil Hashem, of great desecration of Hashem's name. And he understood that when you do Chil Hashem, there really is no atonement for it. There are different levels of Averos in Judaism and different levels of atonement, things that are necessary to achieve atonement. But Chil Hashem, desecrating God's name, is the worst level of sin. And really there is no atonement that one can achieve in one's life. The only atonement one has is death. That's not only tshuva, you have to have tshuva, Yom Kippur, suffering, and death. That is the options available. Or the only way out of death is if one could create a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God's name. But as a blind, broken, crippled man at this point in time, there really is no avenue for him to, in a living way, create a Kiddush Hashem. So he understood that the only option was death. And really he went to this party knowing that he would have to die in this party in order to bring some kind of atonement for his life. And it's interesting that where is he placed? They placed him bein ha'amudim. They placed him between the two pillars. So, what is the idea of the two pillars? We will see in a minute. The Psukim will tell us that the entire structure is a huge structure, it's a huge theater, or whatever it was, big building. The entire structure was held up by these two poles, with the two main posts that held up the entire structure. And as we'll see in a minute, and they put him between these two posts. So obviously there's a lot of hashgacha pratis, divine intervention involved, to enable Shimshon to be able to create this Kiddush Hashem that's about to happen. Okay, so he's like right at his lowest. So just to imagine the scene now. The Plishtim are so happy they caught this guy after all these years, and they're praising their gods. And it's right now the ultimate Chil Hashem. It's being reported all around Canaan. We caught the Jewish leader, and look how we stripped him of his power, and we ascribe our gods. Thank you for doing all this. It's the ultimate disgrace. And we have to always understand that all forms of anti-Semitism to any Jew is obviously towards our God, because we represent our God. So it's the ultimate disgrace that Chil Hashem is happening. So Chavav. Vayomer Shimshon alanar. And Shimshon says to the lad, Hamachzik biyado, who's holding on to his hand, because obviously he could not walk on his own, since he was blinded. So he needed someone to help him. So there's this lad guiding him along. So he says, Hanicha osi, leave me alone. And let me support my hands on the pillars upon which the house rests upon. And I will lean on them. So he's telling the one who's helping him, you don't have to hold me anymore. Just put my hands on the pillars, and I'll be able to rest my hands over here. So remember, one of the Meforshim mentions that he doesn't want to make it seem so obvious that he's going to try to break the whole place down. But just let me leave me so I can just support my hands on this, so I can get a little rest from it, so to speak. So again, some Meforshim say that this is the incredible hashgacha pratis that Hashem brings about, that he's able to put his two hands on this pillar that supports the entire structure. So this shows you, the Rambam tells us, for example, in the introduction to the Mishnayos, he says that Hashem can contrive events to happen that would take years and years until we understand why he does certain things. He gives an example. A person can build a great building thinking he's prepared it for his own use, and in reality God has prepared it for a deserving person. Many years later, a tzaddik can be going by and it's a rainy day and he needs protection and shelter, and there's this house that was built years ago, and really it was only built so this tzaddik would walk by, would have a chance to have some rest from this. And you find many stories. We're told, in the early 1900s, there was relatively few Jews in Shanghai, and there was a Jew who, I forgot exactly the details of the story, but someone requested from a wealthy person that they build a big shul in Shanghai, which really was very unusual. But the wealthy person said, yeah, we'll build the shul in Shanghai, and it really remained empty for about 10, 20, 30 years. For a long time it was empty. No one really understood what the purpose of that shul was. But when the Mir Yeshiva had to run away during the Holocaust, they escaped to Russia and ended up in Kobe, Japan. And the whole yeshiva escaped. It was one of the most unique events of the Holocaust, where a whole yeshiva survived. There were hundreds of guys. They all were able to get across Russia, and they come to Japan. If you're going to be in Japan, well, how are we going to live in Japan? What are we going to do in Japan?
China.
Was it China?
Japan,
I think it was Japan. If I'm not
Japan, there wasn't COVID.
What?
Then I wasn't the same.
I'm pretty sure it was Japan. It was Japan. So, where did they go? They were in that shul that was built, stayed empty for years. Shanghai, whatever. Then maybe it's Kobe. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it was Japan. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember the details. But the thing that's important to remember is that there was a whole yeshiva building waiting for them, and they were there for quite a long time. And they were able to conduct the yeshiva like regular. If that building would have been there, where would they station themselves? It was an empty building, so it was obviously designed for them. The point being over here is that the fact that this building was built in such a way years ago that the two main supports were put in the middle, and that now, for what purpose was it done that way? For one purpose only, that Shimshon could bring down the entire building when it would be necessary, and that's going to be happening shortly. Okay, Pasuk Chav Zayin. V'abayis molei, and the house is filled. It's like a standing room only crowd. Hanoshim v'hanoshim, the men and the women. There seems to be a hey hayidiyah that's telling us of particular men and particular women. V'shama kol sarnei plishtim, over there are all the governors of the plishtim. V'al hagag, and on the roof, kishloshes alavim ish v'isha, 3,000 men and women. Haroim bischok Shimshon, that are watching the denigration of Shimshon. So this is really, this is unbelievable. Now, when it says ha-noshim, ha-anoshim, va-ha-noshim, the men and the women, so it implies that it was only the most important men and women, like the aristocrats. In other words, if you were an important person, you got to go into the temple. That was their temple. You had to be an important person to get in there, and all the common people would have to stand on the roof. You guys have a standing room only, roof seat only over there. They're all there to see the denigration of Shimshon.
Again 3,000. That's again 3,000.
Yeah.
Number comes up again. Why 3,000?
Yeah, okay, I don't know exactly. Again, I'm sure everything here is important numbers. I don't know offhand. But they're all coming for what purpose? Here's the critical point. Haroim bischok Shimshon, to see the entertainment of Shimshon. So now, when you see they're all going to get killed very soon, so we see that their punishment came not so much because they credited their idols, their God, with Shimshon's downfall, but specifically now because they sinned against Shimshon, a human being. In other words, we know that many times God is very lenient with His own honor. Many, many times people can sin against God, and Hashem has lots of mercy and will give people time, even for terrible non-Jews who are sinning against the Jewish people. If it's against God, God can take it. But when you start hurting other people, bein adam lachavero, already Hashem loses his patience with the Jewish people. And for example, give it just one example, so you understand that Hashem is much more severe when He has to punish, in punishing vis-a-vis when you're doing it against people, when you're sinning against people versus God. When did Hashem decree the death penalty against the 10 spies that Moshe sent out for spying the land? So what was it that really got them the punishment? Is they spoke bad about the land of Eretz Yisrael. That is what got them in the hot water more than anything else. Miriam was punished with saras. Why? Because she spoke lashon hara against Moshe Rabbeinu. We see that Hashem really doesn't like when people hurt other people. And here the Navi is focusing on the fact, although it's earlier said that they came to praise their God. Okay, what do you expect? They're praising their God. They have a God, so they're praising their God. So that doesn't really mean anything bad has to happen to them right away. But if they're all coming to see the Schok Shimshon, to have Shimshon entertain them and to debase Shimshon even more, that already kind of seals their fate. Reb Tzadok adds a very interesting point. He says, Vehanoshim, and the women. What's supposed to be about the women? All the women who went to be immoral with Shimshon when he was grinding the millstone, the grain. And they all probably became impregnated by him. So Hashem providentially brought a fact that all those women were there. So that when the roof will come down on them, and all that they hope to gain by having thousands of little anti-Shimshons living in the world, that they should all become killed. So that's all part of the divine plan over here. Pasuk Chav Ches. Vayikra Shimshon el Hashem. Now Shimshon, his second tefillah now to Hashem. We had earlier with the jawbone when he was in trouble, and now we have again when he's in trouble. Again, it seems again that he only really calls out to Hashem when he's in trouble, or maybe that's the only thing the Navi notes. So Vayikra Shimshon al Hashem, and Shimshon calls out to Hashem Vayomer, and he says, Hashem Elokim. He's saying both names of Hashem. Zochreini na, please remember me. V'achasigeini na, and give me strength, please. Achapam hazeh, this time, Elokim, Hashem. V'nokma nekama achas mishtei einai miplishim, and let me avenge one of my eyes from my two eyes against the Plishtim. Okay, so what about the other eye? So the Radak adds the other eye. He brings from Chazal. The other eye is I should be merited with in the world to come. I should be merited from Hashem from the world to come with this. So obviously, what's going on over here is that Shimshon has realized his mistake and he's been doing tshuva. And obviously, you have to look measure for measure. That's why God punishes measure for measure, so people can not so much tit for tat that Hashem should, you did this to me, I'm going to give it back to you this way, the same way you did it to me. But it's so that man can understand where the source of his sins are. If you're punished measure for measure, and you're realizing, why is Hashem doing this to me? Then I have to begin to see, what have I been doing wrong in my life? And when he realized that he's back in Gaza, which was the place where he sinned with the woman before, and his eyes are blinded. So what did I do with my eyes to be blinded? He began to see and recall that indeed even 20 years ago he sinned by saying, she is upright in my eyes. And that he had been wrong in committing by being with the woman innkeeper in Gaza as well. So Shimshon, realizing what he did wrong, began to do tshuva. And he did such a complete tshuva for the sins that he committed with his eyes, that he was now in a position to ask Hashem to do a miracle in merit of one of the eyes. And that is the power of tshuva. Because if he suffered so much because of the punishment of the eye, now he's entitled to go to Hashem and say, you know what, for this suffering I now deserve some kind of reward. Because I got the message. Now that I've done tshuva, so all the good things I've done really still deserve some kind of reward that should be coming. Now this is all what Yaakov has in mind when he's making his prayer for Shimshon, that Hashem should help him as we see what's going to happen. But again, we always see with Yosef and the brothers throughout the story, even though they were off, they were trying to figure, what did we do wrong that Hashem is punishing us over here? So Shimshon is asking, give me revenge for one of my two eyes. So one should be, and Rashi explains that Shimshon was asking Hashem to reward him for the work he had done for sanctifying his eyes. So for one eye that he sanctified, now my eyes are good. They now see properly and I understand what I did wrong. So for sanctifying one of the eyes, he wants to be paid in this world, which is to have the strength to bring down the entire temple. And the reward for the second eye, he wants that to be held for the world to come. So we see a lot of things over here. The first thing we see is how much self-sacrifice in terms of Shimshon over here. Now, now many people think the big self-sacrifice is willing to die. Well, that certainly is true, but on the other hand, what is left for him anyway? He is blinded. He doesn't have much of a future as a human being. A blinded person is already considered like a dead person in the eyes of the rabbis. So dying is a small thing. But what's the big thing? The big thing now for a Jew is certainly the world to come. And we know how important the world to come is. We know that 1 hour in the world to come is greater than all the pleasures of this world. It's an unbelievable, we can't define how great is the pleasures of the world to come. And what is Shimshon willing to do? He's willing to give up, so to speak, half of his pleasure of the world to come. To have two eyes, and both eyes really should be able to enjoy the fact that I sanctified both eyes. I should get a reward for each eye in the world to come. And he's saying, you know what? I'm willing, as it were, I'm willing to give up half of my world to come, if you will enable me to sanctify your name now. To have the strength, to have the miraculous strength, which I'm really not deserving of now. But if you give it to me now, I'll take it as a credit against one of the eyes that I should really be rewarded in the world to come for this. So that's a tremendous sacrifice that he made. Now, how do we define that? It's an infinite pleasure. How do you have half of an infinite pleasure? And we don't understand that. But certainly he's willing to give up a lot. Many years later, a story happened in the 1700s where there was a Rabbi Yitzchak David Bachar. He was marrying off a son in a nearby town. And on the wedding day, the rest of the family set off early to go to the wedding, but he was detained in town for the last minute. So, it's like trying to catch a wedding getting caught in a snowstorm, right? It's coming up over here. And finally, he has a coach that he can go to the out-of-town wedding for his own son's wedding. Evidently, the coach was in no hurry, and despite all the encouragements of this rabbi, the guy's going at an infuriatingly slow pace. This rabbi, he loses his patience because he's going to miss the wedding. So he raises his voice at the coachman. Like he says, can you get going? Like, I guess whatever type of, it's my son's wedding. It's just going, slow down. Anyway, the family, everyone else was already at the wedding. They think the rabbi wasn't able to come, so they began the ceremony without him, right? And the father comes in just in time to see his son under the chuppah. Just at that moment, he just makes it, and they started the chuppah race, and it just runs right in. So suddenly it strikes this rabbi that he had not asked the coachman forgiveness for the strong wording he had with the coachman. So Mamash doesn't even wait. He leaves the wedding, and he pursues the coachman to the next town. The coachman just dropped him off and went on his route to the next town. And in the midst of the wedding, he runs to, he says, I got to find this coachman. So he leaves the city, he leaves the middle of the wedding, and just goes on. So he goes to the coachman and asks the guy if he'll forgive him for the fact that he spoke so strongly to him. So the coachman, a pretty shrewd fellow, says, listen, Rabbi, I'm willing to forgive you, but under one condition, you have to give me half of your world to come. Wow. Half of your share to the world to come. So the rabbi decided it was worthwhile to give up half of his eternal joy in order to undo the wrong that was done, and he agreed to that condition. What God did after that story, I don't know. But the point of the story is that there are people who are willing to give up their shares to make sure to right any wrongs that were happening over here as well.
Is that possible? That's negotiable? I don't think so.
You have many stories like this. We don't
know the end result, so it's hard.
Well, listen, you see that
negotiate our own olam haba. That's only God and us.
Big rabbis, I guess they know what they're doing.
No, you're earning.
I guess they know what they're doing. The reward is there.
Supposed to negotiate.
Okay, it is a big shaila in the poskim if this can be done. This is also regarding, for example, the partnerships with Yisachar and Zvulun. Someone who supports someone in learning, he shares his Torah. So there are lots of discussions of that. If it indeed works or not is immaterial. We understand, though, that what the person is willing to do. And for Shimshon, he was willing to say, I want to give up half of my world to come. I only want one eye's worth in the world to come, and I want to use up one eye for over here. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Pasuk Chav Ches. Vayilfos Shimshon Eshnei Amudei HaTovech. Shimshon is Vayilfos. He embraces the two pillars of the Tovech that are in between. Asher Bayis Nochon Aleim, that the house is resting upon them. Vayisomech Aleim, and he rests upon them. And here, so Vayilafes, number one, it's an interesting word to use instead of grabbing. It says Vayilafes, which really means Vayilpos, rather, which means to embrace. He embraced them. In other words, he's trying to atone for the sinful embraces he may have done in his life beforehand. And now the Malbim picks up on the different verbs over here as he's first embracing it. Then it says Vayisomech Aleim, and he rests upon it. So in other words, he's trying to show that he's just, as opposed to pushing on it, is starting off by saying, like a little bit of his body just to rest on it. But really what he's going to do is he's going to push it with all his strength. But right now he doesn't want to make it seem like he's doing that, because otherwise it wouldn't let him be near that. So the Malbim is showing he's trying to hide what he's doing, but he really wants to let the whole place go down. Okay. Pasuk Lamed. Vayomer Shimshon, so now Shimshon says, Tamos nafshi im plishtim, let my soul die with the plishtim. My soul should die with them, I want to die with them. So the question becomes that he wants to give up his life, so the obvious question is, was he allowed to sacrifice his own life to undo the desecration of God's name? Since when is a person entitled to take his own life? Since when are you allowed to do such a thing? So the rabbis have a big discussion about this. If you're allowed to give up your life in times of sanctifying God's name and stopping a desecration, and so there's a whole discussion if this can happen. So they say, one of the things they say is that if a tzaddik sees that his generation is lax in keeping a certain commandment, so a holy person is allowed to give up his life for that commandment. So people will learn to love and fear God. To say, see how important it was to this Jew. He gave up his life for this. Certainly, Shimshon over here, there's no greater need to sanctify God's name than now. Certainly no greater need. And Shimshon was not asking Hashem to spare his life. He knew there was only one thing left to do. And there are certain times where one can give up one's life. And this was one of them.
Did you say let my soul die with the Philistine, or let my
well,
life?
He means the nefesh, means the life force, not the eternal soul, but the nefesh. Now she means my life force should die with the plishtim. Vayet b'koach, and he pushed with a great strength. Vayipol habayis al hasronim v'al kol ha'am asher bo, and the building fell on all the governors and on all the people that were in it. And this is incredible. Vayu amesim asher hemis b'moso, Rabbi me'asher hemis b'chayev. And the people who died in his death were more than those that he killed in his lifetime. So it's an incredible amount. So he achieved more in his life, more in his death than he achieved in his life. So you see this idea of, again, a yerida l'tzarech aliyah, a descent for the purpose of an ascent, where he went down. Unfortunately, his sins brought him down, but he's able to accomplish so much more in his death than in his life. And you have to realize who he killed over here. It wasn't the number, it wasn't just the quantity, but it's the quality. It was the 5 governors, right? It was the 5 leaders and all the aristocrats. So this is not just a blow of thousands of people being killed. Like, where do they, how do they rebuild after the leaders are destroyed? There's whole infrastructure issues over here. And so this is a tremendous amount of damage he was able to accomplish. And again, this is interesting, as we'll see in a minute. This is what Yaakov prays when he foresees what's going to happen to Shimshon. Now, obviously, if this whole place goes down, what is going to happen to Shimshon? He's going to die, but more so, he's going to get, he's right at the epicenter of all the destruction. Right? It's like the suicide bomber who blows himself up. He's right by the 2 pillars. He's going to push the pillars. Everything's going to come crashing down on everybody, but everything particularly on him. And what will happen? He's going to be buried under tons of rubble, and they probably will not be able to find his body. That's going to be a major problem. So Yaakov, in his blessing to Shimshon, when he says that his rider will, he's the scorpion that hits, it will kill the rider who'll fall backwards. And in other words, when the scorpion hits, the rider that gets killed doesn't fall on the scorpion. It falls backwards, doesn't fall on the scorpion. So he's kind of praying that when they're going to fall, they shouldn't fall on Shimshon, that Shimshon should be able to be found. And indeed, miraculously, the Philistine dead fell away from Shimshon, and it was easier for his fellow Jews to save him. Not save him, but to save the body, recover the body. Lamed Aleph, and that's what happens. Vayirdu Echav v'chol beis avihu, and his brothers and the whole house of his family came down. Vayisu oso, and they picked him up. Vayalu, they brought him up. Vayikbru oso, and they buried him. Between the cities of Tzora and Eshtaol, that was his stomping grounds in his youth. Bekever Manoach Aviv, by the grave of his father Manoach. V'shafat es Yisrael, and he was a judge over the Jewish people, Esrim Shana, for 20 years. So the question is, did we not mention already that he was a judge for 20 years? And number two, what were the Jewish people thinking about Shimshon? You got to think, did they really hold him as a great person? Did they not hold him as a great person? I mean, he was a judge for 20 years before this last incident. And then he goes back and goes to Aza and marries Delilah and all these things. And you could have thought that the Jewish people felt that he had left the fold again, as it were. But we see that no, his family risked their lives going into Philistine territory was a very risky thing. But to save him, and I guess we see this is always the truth, Jews will do anything to save a Jewish body and to bury a Jewish body, how the Israelis will negotiate what they will just to get a body back. So you see as well that they really endangered their lives. The fact that the Navi mentions that Shimshon was buried next to his father, who was the righteous Manoach, who was a very big tzaddik, and not just anybody gets buried next to a tzaddik, even one son. If one son would be a terrible sinner, he would not be buried next to his father. But the fact that he was buried next to his father, and when people went to great trouble to bury Shimshon and bring him next to his father, shows that he really was a righteous person. Now, the fact that it says he ruled for 20 years, so the Radak points out that this was already mentioned in the last chapter, after the story with the jawbone. So what's the difference over there? So one of the interpretations is that above, when it says he ruled for 20 years, this was after the salvation that he brought, and it's as if he already died, and there wasn't much more that he was going to give for the Jewish people. In other words, he did his big thing. He killed a lot of the Plishtim, and he scared the Plishtim. He showed his strength, and he kept things quiet for 20 years. And there really wasn't much to say in terms of what Shimshon did more than that. So we could already, at that point, you could say his career was concluded. Even though it went on, but the stuff that happened afterwards really wasn't much help for the Jewish people. Whereas he did his big stuff, he killed who he had to kill, he scared the Plishtim, he made things quiet for 20 years, and that really was what he was. And there wasn't much more. And now it's just as a final thing to say, okay, now that he died, we'll just repeat that he was the Shovit for 20 years. But the real benefits from him happened from what he did before. And for the last 20 years, they just kind of were rolling on that. They kind of rested on that. But the Yerushalmi says another beautiful shot. Yerushalmi says, we'll end with this. He says that to teach us that the Plishtim were so afraid of what happened after this event, that for another 20 years, it's like he was a shofet. In death, there was 20 years of peace. So there was 20 years of peace in life, and 20 years of peace in death. So that's an amazing thing. That was another reward that he was given, that he was able to help them even in his death. Okay, tomorrow we really finish the parak, but we'll wrap up a few loose ends.